Welcome to the Lead to Win podcast, the podcast where we explore strategies, mindsets, and stories behind successful leadership and personal development. I'm your host, Bo Bergen. Let's do it. Man, I'm looking forward to this one today as we welcome Coach Kurt Hines to the show. Coach Hines is the head football coach at Coronado High School in Coronado, California, San Diego area, right?
Yes, sir.
Having coached for 20 plus years, he uses his platform to inspire, motivate, and empower not only his players, but everyone he comes into contact with. He's also a motivational speaker and utilizes his social media platform to impact coaches and people all over the world. Coach, welcome, and really appreciate you coming on today.
Coach, thanks for having me on. It's I don't know, after an introduction like that, I should just remain silent and not hurt it at all.
I like to fire people up a little bit, catch their attention. So
I love it.
Start off, just give my listeners a little background on you and what inspired you to start coaching.
Yeah, I just wrapped up my 26th year of coaching high school football. Started in the East Coast in New Hampshire, and what started me was I was in a college course. I'm an elementary school teacher. I teach fourth grade. That's what pays the bill, so to speak. But one of my professors was looking for volunteers for a special needs flag football team, and I had worked through a daycare center I'd worked at with good number of children with special needs. So I jumped at the chance and had never thought about coaching up until that point. Played hockey and football from second grade through high school. Stopped hockey earlier, but had a passion for the game, but never thought about coaching until this opportunity presented itself. And there was a moment, Coach, that I hope I never forget. It was a young woman, probably sixth grade, with Down syndrome, who she and I were standing like 4 yards apart from each other. And I remember tossing a football to her as slow as possible, underhand, right in the bucket every time she dropped it, time and time again. And that fifth or sixth time, whatever it was that she caught it, her eyes lit up. And I remember that moment. It was the first time I ever thought, like, I want to do that. Like, I want to be able to do that for people. So reached out to the local high school coach where I was teaching at the time. And long story short, it's funny because I wanted to volunteer. Wasn't looking for a paid position, just wanted to get on staff somewhere. And he said, well, let me stop by your classroom after school one day, and showed up with their team manager, who happened to be a young man who had Down syndrome. So I'm like, that's kind of a small little cool coincidence, if you will. He just so happened to need a head freshman coach. So baptism by fire, I got thrown into that fire and had a blast, learned a lot, messed up a ton, but caught the bug. And I was blessed to coach under someone who knew and loved the game, but more importantly, he did it right, in my opinion. He knew and loved people. And I think too many coaches have that backwards. They know and love the game, but they use people, especially players, as pawns to pad their own stats or resume to just go on to the next bigger and better thing, chasing logos, if you will. So, I've been a head coach for 2 different stints, if you will, 7 years in New Hampshire. It was a brand new high school. My first year as head coach, we set records in the state of New Hampshire for getting beat up more than any other school in the history of football. We get our teeth kicked in. I laugh about it now, but honestly, there wasn't a single game my first year as head coach where people even lied to us. You know, after games, when you walk through and you shake hands, and they're like, hey, great game. And you know you didn't play a great game. You're like, yeah, well, one of us had a great game. No one even lied to us. They just looked at me and said, great field, beautiful stadium. Just like, great, we're that bad. But that first year coaching as a head coach was my greatest coaching year to date. It was painful. It sucked. I hated it. But it was my greatest coaching year to date because it made me solidify my why. It really made me dig deep as to why I want to not just do this, but why I want to be a head coach. And that why all revolved and still revolves around wanting to hand select the people that I coach alongside with. Because I think I love the coaching world, but I think there's too many self-proclaimed gurus who want to prove how smart they are and once again use people, not use the sport to bless people. So we went from getting our teeth kicked in every week that first year to fast forward my last 4 years. We went to the state championship 3 out of the 4 years. We had 144 young men in the program, which for New Hampshire was huge. And then our oldest daughter called. My wife and I have 4 children. three daughters and one son. And she called, and she'd come out to school at San Diego State and had gotten married. So she called and said she's pregnant, and my heart leapt. I was like, yes. And then I was like, no, because I knew we were going to move across country. So left there, came out here to California 9 years ago, and just wrapped up my 7th year as head coach in Coronado. And just love everything about it. Love the blessing it is to be able to coach and to coach great people and to help them become greater people and to coach alongside great people.
Yeah. How hard was that making the
Oh,
switch across the country?
heartbreaking. It was a leap of faith financially because my wife didn't have a job out here yet. We hadn't sold our house yet. And my wife, she had said to me one time, and she was 100% right. She said, we're not that couple that has like a month of mortgage and a month of rent. Like, if we can't sell our house, and I said, I know, but we're going to live the rest of our lives playing the what if game if we don't take this leap of faith. And without getting preachy, I just hopped off a podcast a moment ago that was pretty much all faith based. So I'll try to get preachy to you or your audience. But my faith means everything to me. And I'm not a believer that God will just do things for us if we just pray for it and sit back. We've got to get our hands dirty and be willing to do the work. That being said, I said, Jill, we have, I didn't say we have nothing to lose. We had a lot to lose. But I said, let's just take the shot. We signed over power of attorney to our realtor that we went to church with because we hadn't sold the house yet. And it was about the 3rd or 4th day cross-country trip that she called and said the house sold, which was great. So that was hard, that part of it. What was hardest was leaving a church we loved and leaving our football program. We had just that season lost the state championship by 6 points. We had just wrapped up a fundraiser to build a brand new weight room, so everything was going in the right direction. And then to stand there before them in that weight room and tell them they knew why. They knew that family meant the most to me, my faith in my family. But it was through a lot of tears, But I'm also a firm believer that if you're coaching for the right reason, and then let me back up. If you're coaching just to win games, you better hand select where you go because you got to have the right cats. You got to have the right. I don't care what you run for an offense or a defense. You got to have studs, and there's a lot of other things that come into that. But if you're coaching to, yes, win games, but also to help truly change lives, it doesn't matter where you coach. You can coach in the middle of the woods somewhere. You can coach in Alaska, Hawaii, New York, you name it. So I knew my why for coaching wasn't dependent upon where I was. So it was hard, but I look back now with zero regrets.
Yeah, you mentioned your faith. Talk a little bit about your faith and how it has served as kind of your compass and how you lead.
Yeah, perfectly said. It's a compass because it is paramount in everything I do. My wife and I have been married now for a little over 29 years. And through the grace of God, we pray every morning together and every night together. And she hears me pray every morning and every night, but especially on game day, dear God, and I'll pray about keeping our players safe and knowing. It's funny. I say often, it's not premeditated, but often I'll say, I pray that no one gets seriously hurt. And one year, 10, 15 years ago, after prayer, she said, why don't you just pray that no one gets hurt? And I remember looking at her, I was like, well, because you want to hurt the other guy. Not cheap, not within the confines of the game. If I can hit you hard enough that you think, oh, maybe soccer's a better sport for me, or maybe tiddlywinks or whatever. I said, Jill, it's a violent sport. I think God likes football, and I think God loves the violence of football. I might be making that part up about it. But yet it is my compass in all I do in coaching because I think I heard, this is not my own, but I read or heard a great quote years ago that said, if you want to please everyone, take a note from the playbook of a conductor of the orchestra. Turn your back to the crowd and focus on the instruments, if you will. I'm using air quotes before you. As coaches, if we try to please every player, we're going to fail miserably. There's only one quarterback that's going to start for the program. The other 3, 4, however many backups are going to be upset. Their parents all think we're great until the first game when we have, the starting lineup come out, and then their parents think we're idiots. My faith leads me in that I don't try to please everyone because I never will. But if I can serve God and try to please God, live my life to an audience of one, there will still be people that are upset with me, still be people upset with the play calling and the depth chart and all that. But if I know that I am putting service in the forefront of all of I do as a coach, then I'm not going to fail in God's eyes. And that's who I'm trying to impress, for lack of better words.
Yeah, that softens the blow quite a bit.
Yeah, and I do. I teach at a private Christian school, I coach. It's not ideal, but I coach 25 minutes away at Coronado, which is a public school. I pray with my players. I might lose my job for someday, and that's a hill I'm willing to die on. 100% of the time when I have a young man and or his family come to the coach's office, and if they're going through something as a family or as a student athlete, I will ask them if they believe in God. And I've had several occasions where they say no, and I just smoothly transition to the next, topic of what I think we need to discuss. There have been 2 or 3 times that families have stopped me after saying no and have said, well, what if we said yes? And I've looked at them and just said, well, I would have offered to pray with you. And I've had one of those families say, will you pray with us? For a family that didn't believe in God or had some struggles, or whatever. And I think it's a funny thing, without getting political. Not a fan of anyone grooming my child. My children are all adults now. I've got 2 grandsons. And I don't ever want to groom someone into my faith. But at the same time, I need to walk that line, not a fine line, but I need to live in a way that glorifies God, even if I don't mention his name. And another quote, once again, not my own, I had read years ago that said, always preach the gospel, and when necessary, use words. I think the world's overpopulated with people that preach one thing but live completely different. And if I can love my players in a way, and our assistant coaches in a way, that they look back 5 years after their playing days or 5 years after my death, I don't know when that will be, and makes them think about Christ, I've done my job.
Yep. It's good stuff. So X's and O's question here for you. Without giving too much of your scouting report away, I'm curious what offensive and defensive systems that you like to run, and do your philosophies on those change based on your personnel that you have each year?
Yeah, definitely. I'll start. I'm more of an offensive guy, and I hate that I'm saying this, but defense is just, I love defense. I love coaching defensive positions, but as far as being a coordinator, I've never been a DC. I've been an offensive coordinator for all the years I've been a head coach. I think those guys are smarter than me. I do, and I'm not too proud to admit it, but I'm not happy that I just admitted this, let alone on a podcast. I'm more suited for the offensive side of the ball. Philosophy, yeah, I've always loved the 4-4 defense as a base. However, when I took over, and that's what we ran with tremendous success in Bedford, New Hampshire. When I took over at Coronado, have you ever been to Coronado, San Diego?
As far west as I've been is Vegas. So
okay, so it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. I live off island. I can't afford to live on island, but there is what we call North Island. It's the naval base. So one of the challenges is we have a revolving door of players and coaches that come and go depending on when mom and dad have been deployed or sent somewhere. We don't have a ton of big kids at Coronado. So my defensive coordinator, he's also my assistant head coach, has been at Coronado for 22 years. Great man. We run a 3-3 stack or a 3-5. And because it's hard enough for us to find 4 down linemen defensively that really fit that role and can meet those needs. Mm-hmm. So we're better off going with, a 3 down. And that changes depending on obviously who we're playing and the strength of their offense and what we're trying to shut down and take advantage of. But we, personnel wise, we definitely do try to accommodate the young men we have in our program. And I think if not, then we're failing them and failing ourselves. We have a lot more outside linebacker, corner, safety type bodies than we do Mike linebacker, nose guard, D-tackle bodies. Mm-hmm. And, our philosophy defensively, we call it a piranha defense. Coach Davis, coined that for us. I'm not saying he coined it, throughout football, but just get 11 hats to the ball, and we in my 7 years thus far as the head coach of Coronado, we have never been the biggest team, not once, but we have been better conditioned and more relentless as far as getting hats to the ball and just, we've lost a lot of games. We've won our fair share, but I don't want to build ourselves up to be something we're not. But we are relatively small, but just relentless and just fly to the ball. Offensively, we run the spread. And I was talking to a gentleman just a few days ago, and actually it was an interview. And I interview a complete different way than I think a lot of coaches do. And we can talk about that later if you want or not. But the first interview, I try not to talk football at all. I just want to talk about life. Just kind of get a feel of where they are and kind of dig deeper into what their why is to coaching. And within 5 minutes of the interview, he brought up the spread offense. I hadn't even mentioned it yet. And he's like, yeah, I'm just not a fan of it. I think it's lazy. I think it's lazy blocking. And So in my mind, I'm like, all right, not the best thing to start with, but so I went down that road with him a little bit. And I said, well, what do you think the advantages of zone blocking are? And I wasn't trying to catch him in a trick, and I'm not a guru by any stretch of the imagination, but I want to know his honest thoughts. And then right away he started backtracking. He's like, well, no, I think you can be successful with it if you have the cats. And well, you can be successful with any offense or defense if you have the cats. If my kids are bigger, faster, and stronger than yours, chances are we might do better. And what I personally love about the zone is I think way too many people, even coaches I've talked to have coached for years ago, oh, so you like to pass all the time. No, I just like to spread out the defense. That's it, And if they, I also laugh at, well, not laugh at, but get a chuckle when coaches say, I like to be 75-25, pass run. And people have asked me, what do you like to do more? I like to win games. And if the defense is going to load that box, then yes, we're going to get to the perimeter or try to get to the perimeter and pass more. Our philosophy passing has always been pass short to gain long. Pass short to gain long. And it sounds great in my opinion. It's a lot harder to do because most quarterbacks have guru trainers, self-proclaimed. Most quarterbacks have dads and girlfriends that want to see them pass that long ball. And we stress all the time, I want our offensive linemen holding every play. I don't want them getting caught. And if we can keep them close to my chest, then we're not going to get caught. And it's not dirty or cheap football. It's just football. And I tell our quarterbacks, the sooner we get rid of the ball, the less chances some official is going to see someone pull away and see that grab. Mm-hmm. I think you can run, you can be downhill, you can be smash mouth with the spread offense just as much as you can with anything else. And getting back to the zone blocking that gentleman that was in our office the other night didn't like, because we don't have a lot of big kids. It's not all of it, but so much of it is based off combo blocks and getting that what we call cog, center and guard, or tag, tackle and guard, tackle and tight end, tap blocks, getting them to the next level as once we secure the first. We often talk about our linemen bullying each other off with their hips. And there's a lot of nice drills we do for that. So that's in a nutshell what we do. And I can't with that question not mention special teams, because I think too many coaches, we know it's a third of the game, but if you look at our practice plan, we don't dedicate nearly enough time. And I don't think it should be a third of our practice time. That's unrealistic. But the reason I say I don't think we do a good enough job is really focusing on special teams, because I know there've been too many years myself that I haven't, as a head coach, made it a priority in practice. So over the past 5 or 6 years, we've really built into our schedule designated times for special teams certain days, and what we call bazooka, which is at any practice at any time when I yell bazooka, everyone knows it's a quick field goal. They're going to find out where I am on the field and get there within 10 seconds and get set up, because I was in a game one time as a coach where we scored a touchdown, and we had a pretty decent lead in this game, but we had to burn a timeout because we weren't focused enough as coaches and as players with personnel ready. So, yeah,
you win and lose games sometimes with special teams, for sure.
Absolutely.
So you have quite the following on social media. I know I've personally been following you for a long time. What led you to start using that platform to impact the people that you do?
Great question. The simple answer, the short answer, and the 100% truth is my wife. I teach elementary school full time, as I mentioned. I don't think I've mentioned that. I don't put it out there on Twitter often, but I paint murals. Done that for years. When Facebook and Instagram came out, it was great because it was a platform to still connect with people, but I could show pictures or paintings I've done and murals I've done in buildings and outside and all the different stuff. When Twitter came out, I was like, I've got no use for Twitter. But my wife, she's my best friend. We've been married for 29 years, comes to every game and comes to, some practices from time to time just to hang out and say hi or whatever. Back in New Hampshire, she would often be home already watching the highlights of local games before we were leaving the visitor locker room. And I'd call her on the bus, like, hey, who won this game? Who won that game? So Jill suggested, she said, hey, get on Twitter and just follow. And she mentioned several guys that go to, the reporters that cover games. So did that. And then still back in New Hampshire, I remember posting, I don't remember what the video was, but posted a video that I won't say viral, but it resonated with a lot of people. It just kind of took off. And then my following just kind of grew, exponentially. It's been a humbling thing, to be honest with you, because I don't want to say I struggle with it because I don't lose sleep with it or over it, but I'm sure you've heard of the imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of times that I'm asked to speak at places. I spoke I spoke just before COVID. I got a private message on Twitter from someone saying, "Hey, we'd love to fly you out to the Bahamas to have you speak." So at first I thought it was like one of those, "Hey, kind sir, send me your email or your bank statement. I want to put money into your account. I'm from
Yep.
Uganda or whatever." So I almost didn't respond, but I did, and it was legit. And it was for ADT Securities, and they flew my wife and I out there. But I remember saying during a Skype interview, like this, with the gentleman that reached out to me and his wife, I said, "I'm not trying to talk myself out of a speaking gig, especially in the Bahamas." They had me speak 3 different times. They had me out there 5 days, and I could have the rest of the day and night to myself with my wife and I. And I said, "But why me?" Because I'm not a. I know I have strengths. I know who I am as a Christian. I know who I am as a man. I know who I am as a coach. I know I'm a tremendous coach. And I also know, as I said, defensively, I have a lot to learn. Offensively, I have a lot to learn. So I asked them, I said, "Why me?" And they said, "Well, you're relatable." It's just a lot of people, you talk about big celebrities, which I'm not a celebrity of any stretch of the imagination, but so many people see them, whether it's The Rock or Kevin Hart or whoever, as unattainable, just way out there, completely different lives. And I am the average guy. And I take pride in that. I am an average guy. But with the following, I sometimes struggle with imposter syndrome because, once again, it's humbling. It's humbling. I feel like I have great messages, but there are so many people out there that have other great messages or the same great message. I heard something not too long ago from Wayne Dyer, who has passed away several years ago. He was a motivational speaker. I think he passed away 10, 20 years ago. I don't know. But he talked about ego. And for me, ego is that cocky or arrogant coach or player that just thinks they're better than others. And the way Wayne Dyer broke it down was ego is anytime we EGO, edge God out. And for me, that was a paradigm shift because, and this is just what I took from it, was if God opens a door for us, for you to do this podcast, for me to be a guest on your podcast, for me to go speak somewhere, don't question why God opened the door. Just go through it, not cocky, but confidently that God has you there for a reason. So that's helped me. And it's also, I talk to my students in my 4th grade class about, because not a lot, but a handful of them are allowed by their parents now already to have certain social media platforms. And they'll talk about followers and stuff. And I often remind them of a quote I heard that said, Jesus, Hitler had millions of followers. Jesus had 12. In other words, don't worry about the number of followers. What are you doing with them? And I stress to my students all the time and to our players that every one of us is a leader. And you kind of have them look around. You can see them looking at some of their buddies. I'm like, every single one of you is a leader. The question is, where are you leading people? Because after a big win, some of you are going to lead your friends to your house to have pizza and watch the highlights and hang out and have a great time. Some of you are going to lead your friends to a party where you get caught doing something you shouldn't do that's going to cost us next week's game or whatever it may be. So yeah, it is the following, for lack of better words, the network I've been able to achieve or attain is a blessing, but it's also a humble reminder that if I put something out there, it might be a blessing to someone, and I've got to be cognizant of the fact that if I put something out there, I don't ever want to not offend someone, especially in today's day and age where there are so many different. I might get canceled for this, but I'll say it. So many different pronouns. Everyone wants to accept everything. No, I'll die on that hill also. I want to put out stuff that I believe in. I don't want to put out stuff that's going to get likes just for the sake of getting likes, because I think so many people on social media platforms, that is their concern. What's trending now? What's popular? What can I put out there about gender or politics that's going to get a lot of clicks and likes? And I need to keep the first thing first and make sure I'm being a servant first and serving Christ, not the world.
Yeah. I read a quote one time, and I've kind of tried to mold my leadership style around it, but it was, once you know what you stand for, all your decisions are easy.
Amen.
And man, that applies to any aspect of life and any kind of decision you make. And I've tried to really hold on to that throughout my career. But
Yeah.
Switching gears just a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about the topic of character. And that word can be defined in a variety of different ways. It looks different from player to player, coach to coach. I heard another quote, and I'm not sure where I heard it from, but it said, "Sport doesn't build character; it reveals it." And
Amen.
I go back and forth on, there's a big camp of people that believe that no, you can't actually build character traits from competing in sports or learning from your coaches. I don't know if I agree or not with that, but I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Do you believe that character can be developed and built?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And I kind of jokingly say this, but I'm passionate about what I say this. I am an expert in absolutely nothing. I'm passionate about everything, but I'm an expert in nothing. And that's one of my biggest pet peeves is when people say, oh, yeah, sports build character. If you would ask me that my first 7 or 8 years coaching, I would have said absolutely. Why? Because my first year coaching, I coached on a staff of a man who knew how to treat human beings and how to build character. Then I went to a different program and it was the complete opposite. It was a coach that was using young men to fit his own agenda. The way he spoke down to them and berated them and treated them was horrific. So much so that I said to my wife after 2 weeks, I said, I'm done. I said, I'm going to honor my commitment, which I did. And I'm not going to leave during the season. But once the season's over, I'm going to go back to that first school I was at, or I'm going to apply for the head coaching job down the road. And that's what I did. I applied and was fortunate enough to get that. I think too many coaches also, with the best of intentions, coach, think sports build character just on their own, and they don't. I can't call our offensive indie time inside run and say we're getting better at our inside run game if we don't focus on the inside run game. I can write it down on paper. I can put it on a t-shirt. I can put it on the wall. We need to make sure we're focusing on that. I think sports build character when coaches intentionally model character. We've got to model it, and I think every coach can be loved and a favorite coach when things are going well, when you have a winning record and everyone's getting some decent playing time and everyone's happy. But when the proverbial crap hits the fan, and it's going to for all of us at some point in our career, how are we teaching? How are we coaching? Are we speaking to our young men in the classroom, the locker room, the weight room, the same way we are out in public when there are parents within the earshot and administration? Excuse me. And I think that's the most important. One of my, I wasn't favorite, but one of the greatest compliments I got my first year at Coronado was our first game as head coach. We lost. Well, it wasn't a beating, but we lost. And the following morning, we had our coaches meeting, and it was business as usual for me because I had come from being a head coach that had gone through getting our teeth kicked in every week to winning, championships and being division and conference championships and going to state championships. So we had a meeting, and that was it. Got back in the truck and came home about 25-minute ride from the school, and I got a War and Peace length text from my assistant head coach, who had been at Coronado. As I said, he's been there for 22 years now. And I'm paraphrasing, but excuse me. He sent me a really, really long text saying, "What a breath of fresh air. Thank you so much. We've never had a meeting like that." His words, never had a meeting like that after a loss. And I remember saying to him, "Thank you. Let's talk." So I picked up the phone, called him. I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "With Coach so-and-so, who had been the head coach before me, when we lost the game, it was always finger pointing at the linebacker coach, the linebackers, the defense, the offense, whatever excuse you could find. But it was never a reflection of, hey, we didn't achieve our goal. How do we get better?" So I think even with our coaches, we have to understand that whether we are a head coach or a position coach, doesn't matter our title, that we have a platform, a blessing of a platform to bless, serve, and empower others. Not just those who are coaching. Sometimes we have coaches on our staff that have been coaching for longer than we have, but they came from a program that the head coach allowed you to swear at players, allowed you to berate them, allowed you to embarrass them and joke about them. And that's the first thing I tell our staff. And I correct myself whenever I say my staff, because it's not my staff. I'm blessed to be the head coach, but it's our staff. And I tell them all the time, we are in the business of serving others. If our players only, and I know you've heard this before too from other people, this isn't my own, but I believe this to the core. If our players only become better players, we're failing them miserably. We want them to become better student athletes, better husbands, wives, fathers, mothers, you name it. And that only happens when we make character a priority. And they see that. And if they see us attacking and yelling at and screaming at and berating other coaches, doesn't matter what words we say, they see our actions, and that's what they're going to emulate.
Absolutely. In today's world, athletes are exposed to, and predominantly on social media, but they're exposed to so many things, good and bad. They see how professional players act after when adversity hits. They see all that. There's a lot that goes into the development of someone's character, but why is character so important, and why should a coach emphasize it, especially for today's modern athlete?
Yeah, I personally believe it's so important because that's, once again, as cliche as it sounds, another saying about character is who you are when no one's watching, or character is who you are in the dark. Um, I'll share this because I don't think my son will listen to this one. So when we were living back in New Hampshire, my sons, we have 3 daughters and 1 son, and I was the head coach at Bedford High School. We lived in Goffstown, the neighboring town. So I had to coach against my own son his junior and senior year. Heartbreaking moments, games I'll never forget. But now, years later, beautiful. He just wrapped up his second year on our staff, which has been such a godsend, a blessing to have him on his staff. And he has said to me on at least 2 occasions, Dad, I wish I had a coach like you, which at first confused me tremendously because I was like, but wait a minute. But I was your dad, or I am your dad, and you were in the house with me every day and everything. But there is a different level of authority or respect or whatever from a coach. We might say the exact same thing as coaches that mom and dad of so-and-so has heard for years, but because Coach Bergen or Coach Hines or whoever's saying it, they're taking it as gospel. They're going to really listen to it. As far as the character, it's just the things we teach our young men on the field, and not giving up and not packing it in and fighting through adversity. Hopefully those life lessons are going to stick with them when they do get in a fight with their spouse, when they do have their employer get on them about something, when they do lose a job. And I know I'm not alone. We don't only want to be someone that they can reach out to in those times of trouble. We want to have that open door policy, but we also want to have them to have that innate resiliency within them that says, hey, I've been here before. I've been punched in the face. I've been dropped down to my knees, literally or figuratively. How do I get myself back up? And we talk about it in football. You rely on your teammates. You rely on your coaches. Don't try to go through winning a game by yourself. You're not going to do it, no matter how good you are. Same with life. When you're struggling with your wife and you had a big fight, just give up, pack it in. Well, yeah, that's what most people do nowadays, I think. Just we tried, doesn't work out, and they just get divorced. I'm not judging people that have been divorced. I don't know what they've been through. But when you create a habit of fighting through resiliency on the football field or whatever sport it may be, hopefully that becomes part of your DNA, where you thrive in difficult situations and embracing the suck, however you want to say it. If you embrace the challenges, my son, the part that I was going to say, my son, I don't know if he'll listen to this podcast. Brock, if you are, I'm sorry. He texted Jill and I, my wife and I, yesterday, said, hey, can I come hang at the house for a few nights? Now, the problem with that is he's married. So I didn't know what went on, but he and his wife had some altercations, some fight, and I don't know what it was. And if I wouldn't share that part of it. My first response was absolutely, we'll help you figure it out. I'm not going to say no to my son or my daughter. As soon as I texted him back, my wife and I said a prayer together. I was like, God, help them to work through this. And by the grace of God, literally before we took off, he said, hey, sorry for overacting. We're all good. Don't worry about it. So I'll talk to him when I see him next. I'll see him Wednesday in the weight room. But there's got to be a part of me that believes that there was something I modeled as a father all those years growing up, or as a coach in the 2 years he's coached together, that you don't give up on one another. You don't give up on your spouse. You don't give up on your teammate. And they will get through this struggle. I think just like we wouldn't go into a practice without a practice plan. We wouldn't go into a game without, whether it's a script that we want to start off with or some game plan. I think we need to go into our coaching career of a game plan, and always evolving with it, but a game plan of how am I going to teach and, more importantly, model character. What's that going to look like? And there are a number, I won't bore you or your audience, but there are a number of stories. I'll share one more real quick one. During the height of COVID, our youngest daughter had something happen to her that it was almost like a mini stroke. By the grace of God, it wasn't. She's fine. There's no long-lasting effects. But she had been rushed to the hospital. I got the text from my wife just at the end of the school day before I was going to drive over to practice. And it was during all that nonsense where you couldn't be in the hospital with people and you couldn't go there. And so I remember going to practice. I talked to my wife, said, do you want me to come home? She says, no, go to practice. Everything's good. There's nothing you can do here. So I went to practice, and my emotions came up. So my team saw me crying in front of them. I'm like, just if you believe in God, I said, I'm not going to take practice time right now to pray about this, but I would love you to say, prayer for my daughter. And I could see all the kids like, yeah, coach is here, coach is here. And then for a split second, I thought, wait a minute, am I sending the wrong message? So I stopped. I said, guys, let me make this clear. I'm not here because football means this much to me. I love you guys. But if I could be with my daughter, I would. But right now, all I'd be doing is sitting in the hospital parking lot. So let me make sure you understand. And for me, that was a teachable moment to say, yes, I love you guys. Yes, football means so much to me. But my family will always come first. And this is the reason that I'm not there. So it was great because, like I said, through the grace of God, she was fine. A few days later, we never really found out what it was, which is kind of concerning. But she has no long lasting effects. But it was a moment with our program, and I think as coaches we have these on the daily to stop practice for 30 seconds or stop it for a minute or whatever it may be and have a coachable moment, because it may not be the full program, the 50 of them, 60 of them, 100 of them, whatever it is that really gets the point, but there might be one. There might be one young man or young woman in our program that needed to hear what we said right there in that moment or down the road. So I think it's important as coaches to always look for opportunities to model character.
Yeah. And you kind of answered my next question a little bit, but I was going to ask some practical things that a coach could do to make sure that we're staying on top of, keeping it in the front of our mind that we're here to develop better people. But I believe that, like you said, that's a daily thing, whether it's 30 seconds in practice, whether it's passing them in the hallway. So it's all about making it a habit, developing their character through the choices they make. And it's a constant effort, and it's got to be intentional from coaches. So,
Yeah. And I also, if I could just add one quick thing, this has not always been popular in my coaching career with the staffs I've been blessed to have. But when I was a head coach in New Hampshire and now here at Coronado, we will never meet on Sundays. Never. I know a lot of coaches like, well, you'll never be successful. You can never do it. And I'll never say I was able to prove people wrong, but my coaching staff and I and the players were able to prove people wrong over the years. That's not to say I won't break down film on Sundays. It's not to say I won't hop on a text call or a phone call with coaches. But I think it's important to, so many coaches talk about, especially in front of parents and administration, we want to help our athletes become better members of society, better men and women, husbands and wives, parents, you name it. And then we neglect our own families. And in our pursuit of chasing championship rings, we give up our wedding rings. I have told our staff, if there's ever a time you want to get together with families for a cookout, yeah, I'm in, I'm game. But other than that, Sunday's a family day. It's a sacred day for us, whether we go to church, go to the beach, just sleep in, whatever it is. And another thing with our players, I think a tangible thing for any of your listeners is a mistake I made often with the best of intentions in years past. I would ask players all the time, just connect. Hey, how you doing? I'm good. Or I'm okay. Or I'm great. And I would leave it at that. And now what I do, even if the answer is great, I'll often ask a follow-up question. Why? Why are you great? I had a player just past year, and I won't mention his name, that I was like, hey, so-and-so, how you doing? Right before practice. I'm great, coach. And I stopped, looked at him. I said, what's great? And he looked at me. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, what's great? And you're like, just name one thing. And legit tears right away. Didn't come out, but you could see like the glossy eyes. I'm like, you okay? He's like, no. I said, can we talk after practice? He said, yes. And he was just going through some stuff. So the mistake I made that I don't want to say I no longer make, but I make less frequently, is just taking them on their word. You telling me you're great? Let's talk about it. Why are you great? And if they can smile from ear to ear and say, oh man, I just aced this test, or I just had this happen, or my parents are on my case about my room or whatever it is. But I think more often than not, we're going to find when we ask those questions of our players and our assistant coaches, or if we're not a head coach, our fellow coaches, building relationships. For me, that's what life's about. That's all it's about. If I can live in a way that blesses one other person, I've lived a life well lived. And as a coach, my God, we have an opportunity daily to change people's lives. So I think we always need to, in our pursuit to win games, which, yes, we all love winning and hate losing, we have to try to win hearts, first and foremost.
Yeah, that's good advice. I'm going to try that follow-up question.
Yeah, it's keep me posted. It's powerful because I think sometimes it opens up conversations that you never thought you'd have. And yeah.
So shifting gears one last time here, I want to talk a little bit about toughness. And this comes from, so I ran a professional development survey with my coaches. I sent out a survey and just listed some things that they would be interested in talking about. One of the things they mentioned was toughness. And I don't know how you define it. I mean, maybe you can. toughness is a trait that, successful players and people for that matter seem to always have, and in a variety of forms. What does toughness mean to you, and why is it so important?
Wow. I love, I'm going to paraphrase this by saying, I'm not trying to sound like a jackwagon when I say, oh, I've been on so many podcasts, but in all the podcasts I've been on, I haven't heard that question phrased that way. So I love that question. Um, Toughness comes in a lot of different forms. I think in the world of football, it's misconstrued that toughness is that guy can run through anyone and do anything, doesn't care about anyone. And when you tie faith into it, and whether people are spiritual or not, I think toughness can look different. I think toughness could come out in a teary-eyed conversation with a coworker or a player and pouring your heart out to them and being transparent. I think that's toughness. For me, toughness is the intestinal fortitude to keep going when you feel like you can't. Whether it's with your marriage, whether it's with your job, whether it's with a practice or a game, when you got 4 minutes on the clock and you're down by 47 points, and you're like, all right, well, I'm gonna keep coaching. These kids deserve that, and your teammates that you're standing by deserve your best still. I think it is often modeled in the weight room. I love it so often because I don't think it's about breaking people down and screaming at them and all that stuff. But I think it's working side by side with your players to where they think X number of pounds is the best they can do, or X number of reps is the most they can achieve, and helping them to achieve 2.5 more pounds with good form, or one more rep with good form, or one more set with. I think when we create habits for ourselves of putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations and pushing through that, that's a success. And I actually, there's one talk I've given several times at different clinics, and often I'll start at the beginning of the clinic saying, "There's not a better coach out there than myself." And you could see some people like right away fold their arms, like, "All right, who's this arrogant jackwagon? Like, who's he think he is?" And I do it knowingly, knowing that I'm going to push some buttons and kind of get some defensive feedback right away. But then I go right into how I define success. The world in the coaching world sees success, simply as a scoreboard. What's your win-loss record? How many championship rings do you have? How much money do you make as a coach? What's the logo on your jersey? What level are you at? I think you would agree with me that there are coaches that coach 8-man football, which I've never coached. I've always coached high school football, 11-man football. But I'm a firm believer there are coaches that have only coached 8-man football that are better coaches than some Division I college coaches. It's just with their knowledge of the game, with their service to those they're blessed to coach, whatever it is. How I define success is if I can bless, serve, and empower those I'm blessed to coach, I'm successful. Now, yes, once again, I want to win. Yes, in order to keep my job, you've got to win a certain number of games. And I think that is how it should be. You don't play sports just to show up. There's a reason we keep score. But toughness, I think, is attained and nurtured and developed through intentionally putting ourselves in difficult situations and then failing over and over and over again. And that one time you do succeed, going, oh, it was worth it. That's what it feels like. We do this thing in our practice, not every day, but called racehorse offense, where we have a script, just, hey, second down, down distance situations. And then I want coaches yelling, screaming. I have music in the background sometimes, and it's a very stressful situation. And we are very deliberate with our players saying, listen, we're trying to create a stressful situation for you because it's going to happen Friday night. Whether it's this Friday or next Friday, there's going to be a situation where it seems chaos is all around you. But if you can find that calm inside, whether it's from your faith or not, but if you can just find that calm of, hey, been here, done this, it's going to create that mental toughness. And the last thing I'll say, because I feel like I'm going a little long with this, all that being said, I believe in all that. But also, there are certain players that I coach, that you're like, man, this kid was just born tough. They want to run through the wall. They also have the character where they're not looking down upon the underclassmen. They're just helping them out. The kids that have all the intangibles. That's what, man, that gets your blood going when you have a young man that's just tough inside and out, and then the trick there is to say, all right, how can I help him to be a leader so he can, in a good way, infect and just spread that toughness throughout. But then again, we have players sometimes that the old looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane. Players that just they fill the pads beautifully and they have all the tangibles, but it's the intangibles, that the fear of contact, the fear of physicality that sometimes they get through and sometimes they don't.
Yeah. Those are the guys that you get off the bus first, and that's about it.
Exactly. Exactly.
um, Last couple questions here. So you mentioned mental toughness briefly. It's always a hot topic in the world of sports. Everybody wants to be more mentally tough. How crucial is mental toughness when facing challenges, not only in sports, but also in life? And how can a coach help their players with that?
Yeah, I think it's tremendously important. Because once again, I've heard a pastor say before, and you mentioned your dad's a pastor, 3 stages of everyone's life. You're either just coming out of a storm, you're in the middle of one right now, or hold on because there's one coming, you know? And I don't think that's a doom and gloom, like, oh my gosh, that's a scary thought. No, every day's a blessing. Like, be present, be where your feet are, enjoy every great moment, and realize that there is, no matter how far back your last storm was that you were going through, 2 days ago, 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, 2 years, there's going to be another storm. It's a parent that gets sick, a loved one, whatever it is. Um, that mental toughness, I think, is huge because, I mean, how many times do we see athletes do things that their bodies just shouldn't be able to do? Whether it's a long distance runner or someone who is 6 foot nothing in the NBA going against people that are 6'7" or 6'8" or whatever it is. Or that little slot receiver that, Wes Welker or whoever you want to mention, that just doesn't measure up with what the scouts are looking for, but just has that mental toughness. I think it goes back to each of us individually finding out where does your strength come from. For me, my strength comes from God. That's it. So that's why I pray every morning with my wife, every night with my wife. I pray in the shower when I'm listening to worship music. And I know that in my life, when I look back at my greatest moments and my worst moments, my greatest moments was when I was living the life I was called to live. My worst moments, I got arrested the summer after my freshman year in college. I got arrested by 3 police officers. I got in a fight with 3 police officers. I love our police. I'm a huge supporter of our police. I want to make that very clear. I was drunk. It's not an excuse. I was a fool, but I had 3 years of probation, 300 hours community service, and all that stuff. Well, all the darkest times of my life, I shouldn't say all. My father passed away. That wasn't my fault. Most of the darkest times of my life were me just not being in line with what my why was, where my strength came from. So I think if we can help our players to understand, like, what makes you tick, like what do you believe in, what is your life all about, and for any coaches listening, if they haven't asked their players that question, and I wouldn't ask them collectively, I don't think that's bad. But I think it's a rare thing if you ask a group of young men or young women in a room of 40, 50, 60 people, what are you living for? What drives you? I think it's really hard to get to the deep, deep root of that. But if you mention that and have your players think about that and open up the door and say, hey, anyone that wants to talk to me about that, let me know. Or reach out to certain players. I think it allows us to better help them to fulfill their calling as human beings. I sat down with our quarterbacks last year. We had one returning 2-year captain, young man for us, that pretty much played any position at all. And he had that mental toughness. He has all the intangibles. I sat him down with 2 of our other quarterbacks and said, let's write down a list. I hadn't written anything yet. I gave him some paper to write some notes down on. I said, let's write down the top 10 things you think I'm looking for in a starting quarterback. And I wanted to preface it. I said, it has nothing to do with your arm strength, nothing to do with reading a defense, nothing to do with how well you can tuck the ball and run with it. You saw 2 of them that were newer in our program. And like, well, what are we talking about then? Like, what else should we do? And it got into that leadership, that toughness, that servitude of, hey, if you're a quarterback, you are in the role of serving others. I think that mental toughness is something that once we stop working on that as players, as coaches, as husbands, wives, we're doing ourselves and those we love a disservice.
Yeah, very good. Last question here. It's kind of a big one. And I've interviewed a few guests so far on my new podcast, but I don't think any of them have like already answered the question before I asked it, as much as you have, because you just, you live what you preach, and, from what I've gathered. But, when it's all said and done, what do you want to be remembered by? What do you want your players or the people that you come in contact with? What do you want your legacy to be when it's all said and done?
Love that. 2 quick thoughts here. One is, I want to live in a way, I want to coach in a way that as far as coaching, that my players think and the families I've coached, their sons and daughters, that as much as I love the game, as passionate as I was about the game, I was more passionate about the people. That I used the game to bless people, not used people to elevate my game. And the second thing was I had there was some video that went semi-viral several years ago. So a local San Diego station came to one of our practices, and the reporter was asking me some questions. And she said, "Can we talk to two players?" So I said, "Yeah." And I called over our quarterback and one of our starting linebackers and went back to practice. And the following night or whatever it came on, it was you had said something that made me think of this. Brady, our quarterback at the time, she said, "What is it like to have Coach Hines, someone that's so popular?" However she said it on the newscast. What's it like to have him as your coach? And I'm paraphrasing, but he said, what you see or what the world sees or followers whenever he posts something is what we see day in and day out. And that meant and means the world to me, Coach, because I think a lot of us, I'm sure I've been guilty of it at certain times, even if it's not with the ill intention, we put up a certain front, but we're living a different life. Mm-hmm. And I think when we can be who we say we are, that adds so much weight to our words to our players. And this young man, his senior year was COVID year. Baseball, football player, and he admitted this to me, a lot of the baseball players, our coaches rather, got into his ear saying, "Hey, both seasons are shortened seasons. You should just focus on baseball. You're not a big kid. You're a small quarterback." But, so he came to me during the season. It was like week 2 of that COVID season, and asked to talk. And he's like, "This is where I'm getting pulled in this direction. What do you think I should do?" And he was our starting quarterback. And I remember saying to him, I was like, "Brady," and I knew he had a faith. I said, "Pray about it." I said, "Do you mind?" And I prayed with him. I said, "Brady, no matter what you do," and I don't remember these being the exact words, but "no matter what you do, I promise you I'll be here for you." Well, prayer was beautiful. I don't remember if he prayed or I prayed. I felt it was a beautiful meeting. The following day, he came with all of his equipment and handed it in. I was like, all right, apparently I didn't convince him. But then as I thought about it, that's my job, not my job as a coach, to convince someone how to live their life. It's my job as a coach to help someone to live the life that they want to live. So fast forward, he went to college. His mother was not happy with me at all because part of the decision was he got moved from starting quarterback, and I put a freshman in his position who was taller, and he was a starting slot. And then that's when his baseball coaches started getting into his ear quite a bit. So his mom was not happy that he wasn't starting quarterback anymore. We ended up winning league that year, so it worked out well for our team. He came to me just this past September. I think it was maybe even October. So middle of the season, if you will. And came to me and asked if he could join the staff. He goes, "I know it's the middle of the season. I know." And then he ended up starting breaking down a little bit. He's like, "You were the only person that during that COVID year didn't tell me what to do, but said, no matter what, I'll be there for you." So I think as coaches, we need to remind ourselves that we're in the business of serving others. Yes, we need to do our due diligence and know our X's and O's. Yes, we need to go to clinics and conferences and get better at the nitty gritty stuff, the play calling and the weight strength, strength and conditioning. But ultimately, we need to serve those we're blessed to coach. So when he was able to say that on the news and then ask several years after he graduated to come join the staff, that was another reminder for me, kind of a God moment. Like, all right, God, I'm doing things the right way. Yes, I can be a better play caller. Yes, I need to be a better play caller. Yes, I can get better at X, Y, and Z. But as far as being a servant leader, I'm on the right path.
Yeah, that's really cool story. Those are the things that make it all worth it. And, as bad as your days get, you can look back at those stories and realize that you're doing something right and you're probably where you need to be. So
exactly.
Well, Coach, again, I really appreciate you coming on and talking with us and dropping some knowledge. There was a lot of good stuff in here, and I hope my listeners can grab bits and pieces of it and apply it to their situations. And that's what this podcast is for. So I appreciate it. I look forward to following you in the future. So appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Lead to Win podcast. If you're listening this week, make sure to drop a rating on whatever app you're listening on. I'd love to hear from listeners and make this podcast even more relevant to you. Also, make sure to follow the Lead to Win podcast on social media. We're on Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Give us a follow and feel free to share the content. Again, thanks for listening this week. I'm your host, Bo Bergen. See you next Tuesday.